He also says, thank you for the restraining order. It arrived faster than he expected.
Oh, he means the one he bought off my website, jimcornette.com, not the one that I had taken out on him later when he kept writing me back.
And most people don't say, thank you for the restraining order. That's not something usually, although you kind of did.
Yeah, yes, it was one of the highlights of my summer at that point. Yes, it was.
I have a question or three about Jack Pfefer and his exposing of the sport in 1934 to the New York Times. Did his expose go national, or was it limited to the New York area, thus protecting the majority of developing territories? What was the aftermath of this, and what's Jim's opinion on it, considering on one hand, it's wrestling's golden years, and on the other, it's exposing the business?
Well, the first question, re-rack it and give us the first question so we can follow everything now.
Did the expose in 1934 to the New York Times go national, or was it limited to the New York area?
No, as I understand, it was picked up by wire services, and feel free to jump in on this if you want to, but it was picked up by wire services. It ran places it didn't. It didn't get, there was no television. There were wrestling magazines in existence at that time. I actually have some from that era, and I don't think they printed it. There was little wrestling news on the radio. So basically it did go places, but it was a little more controlled. And also at that point, until the Fall Guys was written in 1937, which used a lot of that information and had got, I think, Marcus Griffin on the trail of it to begin with, it did actually, from what I understand, hurt the business eventually, because things happened slower in those days. Think about this. By the time that you hear about something in California that happened in New York, even on the wire services, it'd be, days or weeks or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Unless it was huge radio news, or on the newsreel when you went to the movies. If you went to the movies, it was harder for a bunch of people, the mainstream of America, to hear about anything back then than it is now. So the way I understand it is, after that became the book, The Fall Guys, and got circulated around, and also World War II came in. A business in a lot of places from the late 30s until the debut of the network television era was down. There was no wrestling in Madison Square Garden between 1939 and 1951. The big heel draw during the World War II years was Wild Bill Longson, and he's still one of the top 10 box office attractions of all time. But mainly in St. Louis and the Midwest, where wrestling still had a good name. In St. Louis, we've talked about his string where he drew over 10,000 people to every show in St. Louis for like 5 years, which was, was amazing. And this was with no television. But that is what led everybody in the wrestling business to, that was the common wisdom from then on, that an expose is going to hurt business, because that expose did come out in the 30s, which led to the book, which led to, at the same time that the economy was recovering from the Depression, where wrestling had been huge, and especially Jim Londo, still the all-time biggest box office attraction. He'd been drawing ballpark crowds during the Depression. Now the Depression is over with. Yes, we're in the war, but wrestling sucks in a lot of places. Was it the war and the fact that a lot of the talent was in the service, or did the expose take, or was it both? Probably. But that was the conventional wisdom from then on out, that an expose hurt. And local exposés in different places at different times hurt different territories. Now, he says where the territories were forming, the territories weren't forming in the 30s. They wouldn't form till the 50s. There were booking offices. The Nashville booking office, Nick Goulas and Roy Welch, would send talent to a variety of promoters in their area, in that geographic area, or the Dallas booking office, or that booking office. But there weren't really territories as we knew them until television and after that they started for us. But then exposés would hurt the local business.
Exposés would hurt, but also Jack Pfefer would now have a reputation, which he seemed to love, where he was going to go into a territory, and if you didn't work with him, if you didn't take whoever he was booking, if you gave him any problem, he was going to go to the newspaper and expose your business.
Yes, he was in the wrestling business in some way or another for 35 more years after he did that. He originally was like, he was a little, crow-faced, Russian Jew that came over with the opera company, right? But he'd gotten into wrestling in the 20s. And as far as promotion, he was never an athlete or physical, but as far as being a promoter and a manager, he managed the Fargos. He's the one that booked the Fargos in Tennessee and in New York and all the places that they went. And Jackie Fargo said Jack Pfefer always made him a ton of money. But at the same time, he was from then on known as the outlaw promoter. If you didn't cut him in, as you said, he'd go to the newspaper. That's why when he went to Tennessee in the 60s one time and had girl wrestlers and said, if you don't book my girls for 2 weeks, I go to the newspaper and expose the business. Christine Jarrett in the meeting with Goulas and him said something to the effect of, you might just end up dead. and there is it in the Jack Pfefer collection in Notre Dame, there is a note handwritten with like on a Nashville or either Goulas Welch booking office or a Nashville hotel letterhead. It says, in Pfeffer's handwriting, this is when Christine Jarrett threatened to kill me. But that's what he would do. And he worked his way in or bullied his way in or connived his way into the booking, being the booking agent for Madison Square Garden a couple times in the 50s. He's the guy who pioneered the sound-alike names. If he's running opposition and Bobo Brazil is over in Detroit, on Jack Pfeffer's show, you get Hobo Brazil or Bummy Rogers or Bruno San Martino.
Haystacks Muldoon.
And so it's kind of fitting that while the Fall Guys details the blueprint for the modern day wrestling business as far as the Toots Mondt inventing the finish and the program and the angle and Lewis and Sandow controlling the title and etc. Jack Pfefer, who was the source for a lot of the material in the first major expose, when he got mad because he got aced out of the New York office, he became the prototype for every outlaw promoter for the next 50 years. It all kind of everything that we see or have seen for all that time in wrestling started in the 30s at about the same time.
Forget about a Vince biography. The one that would really be so intriguing would be a Jack Pfefer one.
Good Lord. And, there's got to be a few people still around that had some kind of dealings with him. But more importantly, he left because he was the hoarder. He left that collection of memos and letters and contracts and paper and ephemera to where you could, people have gone through it. I want to go someday and take a look. That's the only reason I want to go to fucking South Bend, Indiana. But you could do a hell of a book if you spent your life in there.
The first person I would call if I was going to do that book would be Tom Burke. Because Tom Burke is probably the biggest expert on Jack Pfefer out there. And he's been to Notre Dame a few times looking at that collection. And you got to remember, he was everywhere. He was in Chicago, which was the end of Fred Kohler in Chicago. He destroyed Chicago.
Yeah, just destroyed the most popular wrestling city in the country.
He was in Boston for Tony Santos and had good results with his, bullshit named wrestlers. And a lot of guys got their start there around that time. He was really bounced all over New York. He somehow stayed powerful in New York, like into the late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah, that's how he got the Fargos in.
Yeah, they had Rocca, he had Zuma. It's like, okay, I got my own Rocca.
Well, and then they had Rocca meet Zuma.
That's right. Yeah.
And it sold out twice. If you were an acrobatic Argentinian grappler in the late 50s, you needed to go to New York. You'd make you some money.